Chapter 24.
"Moving bullets is much easier than you are thinking, Finn,"
Zoo said with a tinge of boredom in his voice.
"There are some basic rules that you need to know up front. The laws of physics are still in charge. Momentum is a function of mass and speed. Therefore, a bullet traveling at extremely high speed has a great deal of momentum even though its mass is extremely low. Do you understand?"
Yeah, force equals mass times acceleration, Newton's second law, I replied.
"Good. As you already know, your will can only reach so far, and the closer an object is to you, the easier it is to use the power of creation to move it. Something like car would need to be very close to you. A balloon blowing in the wind could be several miles away and still be within your reach."
So how far can you deflect bullets? Zoo flashed a hint of irritation that I interrupted his lesson.
"A bullet can be deflected at great distance using air movements, but to directly impact and control a bullet 20 feet is about maximum. With higher caliber, that number goes down. We will be focusing on deflecting, which is the most basic defense to keep you alive. Then we will teach you some basic strategies for combating and disarming a group of attackers. Let us begin."
At that, we walked to the corner hallway which led to the bedrooms. Beyond that corridor, we entered another room which had no furnishings, just cinder block walls and fluorescent lights. In the corner was a table that had an assortment of guns and boxes of ammunition. Zoo walked to the far end of the room and motioned for me to follow. Nella came in also and closed the door behind him. "You have a shooting range in your house. Excellent," I said, trying not to show my nerves.
"This is a 25-yard range. We will start at that distance and then move closer. Obviously, closer you are to the gun, the less time you have to react. Stand next to me here and face Nella."
I was barely turned around when the deafening roar of a gun went off. Zoo didn't even move. For some reason, I was on the floor with my hands covering my head, heart pounding, pants potentially a little damp. "Rule number 1, Nella yelled from the other end of the hallway. "Always be prepared to defend yourself." Zoo pulled me to my feet.
"You have pretty good reflexes. I never see anyone hit ground so fast."
He had a smirk on his face that I usually wore when I was being the smartass.
"Now focus on the bullet, not on your fear. Fear is the instinctual response to hearing gunshot. That needs a change. For now, just trust that I will protect you. Focus your mind on seeing bullet. I will take care of moving it."
"So you want me to do the blue vision thing again, right?" Again with the three-headed look.
"Explain yourself, Finn."
Uh-oh. "Well, I figured it was normal that when you use the power, everything slows down and shifts to a shade of blue. That's what happens sometimes for me when I use the power. That's what happened when I cured Shadrach. Let me guess. Based on the way you're looking at me, I'd say that seeing blue means I'm actually summoning the power of Satan, right?"
"Don't be idiot. Of course you're not summoning the power of Satan. He would not share his power anyway. It is usually very difficult to have that level of focus where time can be controlled as well. There are very few people that have this level of control and focus."
Zoo rubbed his thin chin beard in deep thought.
"I may have misjudged you, Finn. The clarity and focus that I achieve through meditation may come more naturally to you. Lucky for you, you suck at meditating."
No argument from me, although I have been known to do some profound meditating after consuming some herbal brownies in college. But he probably isn't interested. Zoo continued.
"The ability to control time will be your greatest advantage in a fight."
Well, I don't know about slowing time, just that at times when using the power, especially when I'm concentrating deeply, everything has a slight blue tinge to it, and occasionally people seem to glow when everything else is blue. When we first played the game with the tennis ball, I noticed that you glowed slightly when everything else was blue.
Indeed, when you have engaged the power, you will be able to see others using the power as well. It can be very useful in the middle of a fight.
Good to know. So, how do I slow time? I asked. Zoo just shook his head in front of me.
Not now. You should focus on seeing a bullet. That will be a huge step. Do not expect to be able to move bullet today. It takes long time to overcome the fear of bullets in order to be able to control them. Remember, that fear is your number one enemy, the greatest weapon against the power of creation. Let us begin.
Nella was standing on the other side of the long room by the table of guns. Zoo nodded, and without hesitation, Nella fired 3 quick shots from a pistol directly at us. The flare from the gun and the smoke dancing under the lights. My heart was in my mouth, beating like it wanted to be free from its cage. The percussive gun blast deafening my ears. Zoo was standing motionless as if nothing had happened. It took me several seconds to realize that the 3 bullets were hovering, motionless, just inches from his face. He slowly reached up and scooped them out of the air and handed them to me. I held the heavy bullets in my hand, and the realization hit me that this was not a game, not an adventure, and certainly not a casual lesson. The days of floating pillows across the room and feeling like a big deal seemed small and trivial now. I nodded to Zoo, who, in turn, looked back at Nella. She fired again. For what seemed like hours, and after hundreds of rounds of ammunition from multiple guns, I was no closer to seeing or controlling the bullets than I was the prior day in that parking lot. Marcus had come in a few times to relieve Nella and shoot the shotgun and rifle, probably to prevent breaking the old lady with the recoil, or maybe because he liked shooting at white people. I tried connecting to a variety of sources, ranging from the picture in my wallet to imagining a bit of Mozart that I liked to play. No matter, as soon as the crack of the gun sounded, all focus and control were lost. I ran my fingers through my hair and grabbed a handful in frustration. Zoo held up a hand to Nella, indicating she was supposed to stop, or maybe it meant shoot the new guy in the hand. He said,
"It was expected that you would struggle to overcome the fear of a gun being fired at you. Usually, it gets easier after a continuous practice like this, as you get desensitized to the sound and percussion blast."
He sighed and shook his head slightly.
"We were hoping, with your general advanced abilities, that you would be able to skip ahead past the preliminary training. Let's try something that you know you can do."
At that, he held up a hand and a fist, and Nella responded with a nod and went over to the table and retrieved a long white tube. A second later, a whoomp sound was followed by a bright yellow tennis ball that landed in Zoo's hand at top speed. A second later, several sequential sounds were followed by more tennis balls, all of which stopped in midair in front of me. Huh. Thanks, Zoo. I guess I wasn't ready. What should I do now?
You know what to do. Connect to source. Focus your will. Impact the object. The balls will be fired at me for now. You need to try to move them any way you can.
At that, Zoo looked down the field at Nella and pointed at himself and nodded. She immediately fired again before I was ready, and the tennis ball flew at top speed to within an inch of Zoo's face and stopped. He looked at me and shook his head.
Try again. Connect to source. Should be automatic. Just focus your will and act.
I nodded and focused my will on the tennis ball still floating in front of him and pulled it into my hand with a slap. I'm ready, I said. Nella fired again, and the ball flew at top speed directly at Zoo, but as it neared, it appeared to slow slightly, enough for me to focus on it and pull it into my open hand. Whack! The sting of the ball on my palm made my eyes water. That's different than crying, by the way. I dropped the ball and shook my hand. Damn it! Zoo immediately grabbed my hand and held it, It warmed for a second, and then the pain ebbed away. I flexed my fingers to make sure that they were all still working and massaged my scar from the prior lesson with the knife. As if reading my mind, Zoo said,
"You should know better than most not to pull things directly to yourself till you have better control."
"I know," I responded without thinking, "but it seemed to be moving much slower. I don't know why it hurts so bad."
"The ball did not slow down, Finn. You are mistaken."
Zoo, I saw it. It slowed down." Zoo smiled and shook his head.
"A very good lesson indeed. You slow time, but not the ball. Remember that when you use a power, you are tapping into another dimension entirely, a dimension where time is a variable, or possibly doesn't exist at all. This is the place of a creator of eternity. You can manipulate time, but that is only for you and your existence. I have spent what seemed like entire days in meditation, only to wake up and have lost only but a few minutes. Everything else attached to this world is still attached to time and the forces of nature. The ball never slowed, even though it seemed to you like it did. Next time, bring a ball to stop in front of you and then grab it."
"So, is it important to slow time to move bullets?"
"No, not move them. But if you want to stop them, then yes, you will most likely need to slow time in order to be able to properly focus your will. There is something else to keep in mind. Your body is attached to natural world, and thus to time as well. Even though it may seem to you that you are able to move or react quickly to avoid a bullet or speeding car, your body and reactions are still governed by laws of physics. Use the power of creation to move things away from you or bring them to stop. If you slow time so you can get out of way, you will find yourself watching your demise in slow motion. You understand?"
"Yeah, I think so. You are saying that it is easy to fool myself into thinking that I can escape danger when I slow time. But in reality, I will be slowed too. The only thing that doesn't get slow is the power of creation, because it isn't from our existence anyway, correct?" Zoo nodded, and Nella must have interpreted that as her cue, or she got bored because 3 balls sped by Zoo's head and hit the wall behind us. He looked back at me.
"Well done."
I wasn't sure I did that or not. It didn't seem like I had time to properly impact them.
"When just moving or deflecting a ball or bullet, it takes a tiny amount of focused will. It is actually much easier than you think, as long as you can see the thing you are trying to impact."
He looked down the room, and Nella had a smirk on her face, indicating that she had no real remorse for firing before we were ready. Zoo looked back at the 3 balls rolling on the ground, and with a flip of his wrist, they leapt in the air and flew at top speed back at Nella's head. She stopped them mid-air in front of her and then reloaded them into the tube.
"Ready?"
Zoo asked, to me keeping an eye on Nella.
"It is now your turn to stop the balls before I get hit. I will not be pleased if I am hit."
No pressure. Nella launched a single ball, and without much of a thought, the ball stopped briefly and then dropped straight down. A smile escaped my mouth, and if I wasn't mistaken, Zoo might have been trying to smile as well. I imagine he doesn't practice that much. 3 more balls flew toward us, all stopping in the same location before bouncing to the ground. Nella kept firing, the balls kept stopping, as if hitting a soft wall. Just when I was feeling quite pleased with myself, the launch tube made a distinctive, deeper whooshing sound, and instead of a bright yellow tennis ball, a hard baseball flew directly at Zoo's face. It sped past the soft wall that had been my natural stopping point for the lighter tennis balls, and finally skidded to a stop 6 inches from his nose. "Wait, time out, I have a question," I shouted to Nella before she launched something else at me. "Why did the baseball go further? Why didn't it stop like the tennis balls?" Zoo was quick to answer.
"Remember the laws of physics. The baseball heavier, more momentum. It will therefore take more force to bring it to stop. You will need to focus your will more intently to stop the baseball earlier. The ball will only stop when acted upon by equal and opposite force. Keep in mind that the strength of your will increases the closer object get to you. Notice how easily you can stop all the tennis balls at roughly same distance from you, but the baseball move much closer before stopping. If a steel ball was hurled at you now, it may actually smack into you, breaking through your force of your will entirely. Of course, you will have slowed it down significantly, so you may not cause too much damage, or it could crush your skull, but we get ahead of ourselves.
Okay, I need to exert more of my will, give it a little more gas, so to speak. Zoo raised a suspicious eyebrow, so I explained. I picture it like a car engine. Sure, it can go 100 miles an hour, but most of the time you only go 35. You are saying that I have a more powerful engine inside me. I just need to step on the gas a little. Zoo nodded and pulled his chin beard a little.
Very good. You are getting it.
At that, he nodded back to Nella, and the ball started flying once more. After what felt like 1,000 balls were launched at me, Nella finally took a break. She had been using a combination of tennis balls and baseballs. Eventually, I got the hang of exerting more force for the baseballs. Sometimes, when I was caught off guard or the balls were coming too fast, I would just deflect, but mostly I would stop them midair. Catching up with Nella, I asked, "So, how do you think I'm doing?" Nella looked at me, then back at Zoo, coming up from behind us.
"I think you can move bullets any time you want. Just figure out how not to be afraid of loud noises," she added with a smirk.
Zoo nodded and added,
"Your focus is much better than I anticipate. After lunch, we go back of bullets. What you have done in day usually take most people month or more. I do not know why your abilities so uninhibited, but a power definitely flows freely from you, so long as you can maintain focus."
In truth, I was not at all uninhibited just one short year ago. The process of peeling back the layers of lies and half-truths in all aspects of life took quite a while. And it was painful, too. My career was a joke. Sure, I loved chemistry, but the reality was I was just a tool, a means to an end, a number on a P&L statement. And at any time, a bean counter in a corner office with a Mercedes parked in a private spot could decide to cross my name off a list. The term career was just another invention to get people to voluntarily glue themselves to an assembly line. Religion was the same way. Convince everyone that you have the answer to the biggest fear of human existence: not existing. Assure them that an all-powerful invisible being can simultaneously be everywhere and hear every petition from every humanoid walking this rock. And don't forget that he, because God is a dude, can suspend all laws of physics whenever he wants. So keep following the rules and ask nicely for wealth and prosperity. And don't forget to cough up some assembly line money once a week. No more. Peel away the false layers, clean the slate, start over. That's been my life, and maybe that's why I can pick things up faster. Everyone else still needs to unload all the baggage. After a short lunch, I was eager to get back to practicing, but Nella and Zoo were discussing something quietly across the room. Daniel and I were floating grapes around the kitchen table in a racetrack pattern. The single door opened and caught my attention as Mike, the pimple kid, walked in and proceeded to walk directly to Nella and Zoo.
"Daniel, who's that?"
"Oh, that's Mike," he replied, which I already knew. "He stops by now and then. He isn't really part of the cell here or anything, so he is probably just one of the inside people that Nella uses to keep track of the fallen in the city. Why? Do you recognize him?"
"Yeah, he works weekends at the coffee shop. I think we should go say hi." Daniel's look told me he was not interested, so I proceeded alone. As I approached, I caught Zoo's eye, and he cleared his throat so everyone looked in my direction. Mike spoke first with an exaggerated grin. "Finn, harder to kill than you look. Good job yesterday. Nella was just filling me in." Nella sat quietly, saying nothing, which was a clear indication that they were discussing something else entirely. If they were just discussing the events of the battle, there wouldn't be any reason not to include me. I was there, after all. Mike looked back at Nella as if deciding whether to say something. I decided to help him out. Do you really need me to call bullshit here? Who are you really, Mike? I believe in the occasional coincidence, just not repetitive coincidences. Mike was caught a bit off guard, but after a second or two chuckled and stepped toward me. You are quickly becoming one of my favorite people. Your direct approach to nonsense is refreshing, but it will probably get you restarted someday. I'm actually here to talk to you. Nella was informing me how foolish it is to try and warn you about Tiffany, that you need to be convinced of her actual role and purpose in your life. I felt my Irish temper starting to sizzle. Mike stared directly at me for a full second before continuing. So I won't bother. All I have is more words anyway, and I doubt you need any more of that. Let's walk a bit so we can talk. He spoke with an authority that betrayed his boyish appearance and bad acne. We walked to the end of the room by the piano and the graffiti wall. I decided to push him for clarity. What's your role in this, Mike? You don't seem to be a member of this cell, yet you obviously have some serious value or importance for Zoo and Nella to both drop what they are doing to talk to you. You walked in here on your own, which means you not only know where the safe house is, but also know how to use the power to open the door. What gives? Mike was smiling widely now. How do you know I don't have one of my friends waiting for me in the garage? And you should be able to guess my actual role. Unfortunately, I'm forbidden to discuss myself in any way. Best I can do is give hints. He glanced at the writings on the wall beside us. And which of these is your hints? I asked with an obvious tone of sarcasm. Normally, I would have walked away from such arrogance. What 16-year-old kid knows anything worth hearing, especially about life and death matters? Yes, teenagers irritate me, but for some reason, this kid was not all that he seemed. Several, like this one, he replied, pointing to a quote written in black marker. At the core of fearlessness is fear. To become fearless, you must stand before your fear and not relent. Michael, I read. Is that you by any chance? He nodded without smiling, a sudden seriousness about him as he searched the hundreds of scribbles on the wall. And here's my favorite, he said, pointing to another. Only with absolute fearlessness can we slay the dragons of mediocrity that invade our gardens. John Maynard Keyes. Fear seems to be a popular theme for you, Mike, I replied. He nodded without looking back at me, slowly dragging his fingers over the wall, searching for the next quote. Fear is the most potent weapon of our adversary. If I were to ask you what the opposite of love was, what would you say? Well, the opposite of love would be hate, I think. That makes sense in today's world, but it is not true in our battle for eternity. Fear is the opposite of love. If love drives us to take action and fills us with power, then fear freezes us in indecision and makes us powerless. Fear is your enemy, Finn. His hand had come to rest on one quote that stood alone in the wall. You can forget every quote on this wall as long as you remember this one. It is the only one that matters in the end. I read. Upon the setting sun of a new day, take heed where demons hide. Yeah, Nella told me this was important, but I'm not sure what it means. Where do demons hide? Mike was shaking his head. I wish I could tell you. Unfortunately, there are rules that I cannot break. More rules than you have to worry about. I will help you however I can, but when the sun sets, he tapped the wall one more time, you are on your own. I really dislike teenagers. Mike left after a few more private words with Nella. She opened the door for him and came back to me, still standing by the word wall. Ready to be shot at, Finn? She had a grin on her face that indicated she was probably a little too excited to fire deadly weapons at me. We are bringing Daniel with us this time. Whenever you feel like you're getting pretty good at something, ask Daniel to try it and he will make you feel small again. There are very few things that I can do that Daniel cannot do better. Back in the room, Daniel stood with me at the far end with his giant wild grin and carefree hair. Nella was taking her time reloading all the guns. "Well, kid," I said to him, the excitement radiating off his constant motion. "You sure you can do this?" I had a vision of something going wrong and me having to pull bullets out of his blonde hair.
"We practice this all the time, Finn. How else do you get good at moving bullets except by having someone shoot at you? Unless you plan on getting attacked by tennis players. Most fall and go for the heavier weapons."
He looked down at Nella and yelled,
"I'm ready, Nella. Let's go."
Without another word, a gun cracked, and the bullet suddenly appeared in front of the boy. 2 more shots rang out, making me flinch again. Daniel was totally unfazed, and now 3 bullets hung in the air a few feet in front of him. A louder boom shook my chest, and I stepped back, my heart beating hard again. Another 6 steel balls joined the other bullets. Nella had switched to a shotgun to change things up. Daniel wasn't smiling so big anymore, as his face reflected serious concentration. He flicked his wrist and the bullets collapsed into a loose ball spinning before him. Daniel punched the air with his stump and the ball rocketed back at Nella, who deflected the ball, and a clattering of bullets echoed in the room.
"Want to see something cool? I can do it with my eyes closed," he said, as he tightly closed his eyes.
"No, Daniel," I said quickly, and stepped over to him to get him to stop messing around. A large crack of a gun resounded, and the world shifted to blue. The bullet made a wispy trail and curved around the head of the squinting boy. A thud indicated that it hit the rubber matted back wall. I looked down at Nella. The world still appeared to have a blue tinge, but was moving at normal speed. 2 more cracks resounded as Nella was dual-wielding revolvers. The wispy trails appeared again, and as I focused on their approach, they seemed to slow. I forced my focus on pushing them away, and they immediately moved away from the boy and curved into the sidewall, burying deep in the padding. A hollow voice in the distance was complaining. Finally, a jab in the side snapped me back to reality.
"Hey, I was trying to show you something,"
Daniel complained, as if I was intruding in his private show. Nella yelled from the other side of the room,
"Not bad, Finn. You did it."
No warning, and she fired again. As if controlled by instinct now, the world shifted back to blue and the bullets curved into the wall. More shots and more bullets struck the walls.
"Now try stopping the bullets,"
Nella yelled from the other side. A higher-pitched crack sent a smaller bullet trail in my direction. But off to the side, away from my face, the blue bullet seemed to slow till it seemed motionless. Got it, I thought to myself. This isn't so hard after all. With that last confident thought, I released the bullet, expecting it to remain in place like it did for Daniel and Zoo. Instead, as soon as the blue hue started to fade, the bullet sped back to normal speed and whipped by just inches from my face. Don't got it.
"That's a good way to get shot, Finn. Try to actually stop it before it goes through your head,"
Daniel said with full sarcasm. He held out his good hand to Nella so she knew not to fire again. "I thought I did," I replied. "I saw the bullet stop and everything. I'm not sure why it sped up again." Zoo had walked down to our end and replied,
"Well, it is good that you could see a bullet. Did everything go blue?"
"Yeah, when I stopped the bullet, I could see it motionless with the trail behind it."
"Well, that should be your first clue," Zoo explained. "If it is still making an air distortion trail, then it is still moving. It sounds like you slowed time down so that it appeared to you like it was stopped. But in reality, it was only time that stopped for you, not the bullet. You need to actually push back on bullet to make it stop. The trail will disappear when it stops."
"Did you see it slow down at all?"
"It looked to us like you just stood there and watched it fly by your face. Good thing Nella has bad aim."
Indeed. I swallowed hard at my huge ear that almost added some ventilation to my skull. Daniel motioned to Nella to start again, and another high-pitched crack sent a bullet back toward my head, again slightly off to the side. The world did not shift to blue, and I never saw the bullet trail as it slammed into the back wall. Daniel just looked up at me as if wondering if I was a complete moron. He touched his stump to my elbow and nodded for Nella to shoot again. The next bullet was on its way and slammed hard into the wall. My heart resumed its heavy beating, and I felt my palms starting to sweat. Without waiting for another invitation, Nella started firing continuously. each bullet speeding just inches away from my face, blowing air across my cheek. I was afraid to move for fear of swaying into the bullet path. The ice-cold sensation from Daniel touching my elbow somehow snapped me out of my building panic state. Like a wave of calm, my heart slowed and the crack of the gun took on an echo effect. The world shifted to blue. The bullets developed a wisping trail of distortion. With my mind half on the boy touching my elbow, I felt the bullets slowing down as I pushed against them. One by one, each bullet came to a stop in front of me, the distortion fading slowly behind each one. Nella finally stopped shooting, presumably to reload. I let the bullets fall to the floor, and the world returned to normal. Daniel grinned up at me with unnatural excitement.
"Do you know what this means, Finn?"
Daniel said excitedly. I shook my head.
"It means Zoo has to cook us Chinese tonight."
What? Nella responded as she walked down to meet us.
Zoo lost the bet. He said you wouldn't be stopping bullets on your first day. I bet otherwise.
And what would we be having if you lost? Daniel shook his head in an involuntary shiver.
Sushi. Yuck. Nella hates it too, so we never have it, but it's Zoo's favorite.
I happen to agree, I replied. Uncooked fish is called bait. You should have told me I would have to eat sushi if I failed. I wouldn't have screwed around so much.
Nella just smiled. Let's take a break. I need to talk with Zoo so he can get dinner started.
She took a little too much pleasure at this. That gave me a chance to ask Daniel a few questions. Daniel, why don't you just disarm everyone who is shooting at you? Just pull the guns out of your hands.
Yeah, Nella says that's a bad idea, unless you're very careful. It has something to do with the pulling motion of the gun, making it fire. And then you're pulling the bullets even faster than normal right to you. Does that make sense?
I mulled over the explanation and imagined the action of pulling a gun out of someone's hand. I guess that makes sense. Assuming the gun was pointed right at me when I pulled it, I would be pulling the bullets as well. If the hunter's finger was on the trigger at the time, pulling the bullet away would make them physically pull the trigger. Then you would be pulling a bullet which is already traveling at top speed.
Yeah, something like that. Nella has seen several people get restarted by pulling bullets directly into themselves accidentally. When you pulled that shotgun into your hands, you were standing off to the side so it didn't pull the trigger. Good thing, too, because it was pointed at my head, he said with a grin. I was relieved that he had such a sense of humor considering I could have killed him.
Sorry, kid. I had no idea I could have killed you.
Oh, relax, Finn. Jeez. You saved Shad and me, and we were able to restart a bunch of hunters. We won that battle, no matter what Nella says. She prefers to just hide out and never risk anything. Any exposure is a failure to her.
Indeed. The fact that we survived was not an event to celebrate in Nella's eyes. She wanted to be invisible. I was lost in thought when Daniel leaned against me in a half hug, catching me off guard. Yeah, I like you too, kid. The Chinese food that Zoo prepared for dinner was more traditional than I hoped for. Apparently fried wontons and sweet and sour pork were more American than Chinese. Still, the wonton soup, spring rolls, and fried rice were quite good. After dinner, we returned to the shooting range and practiced stopping bullets. At some point, they started shooting directly at me instead of safely off to the side. Of course, Nella never let on that she was now aiming directly at me, or I probably would have suffered from an ass-puckering panic attack and caught one right between the eyes. Zoo was standing by for safety, and I never quite figured out if that was to stop any that I missed or to do field surgery. The trickiest part was when Marcus came in to assist Nella in shooting. They would both fire at the same time using different caliber weapons, which turned out to be quite the challenge. The rifle shots were traveling so much faster than the shotgun slugs, but the slugs had so much mass that I had to push my will harder against them to make them stop. Whenever I was overwhelmed, I would just push them around me so that they would slam into the back wall. The last skill we practiced was to pull bullets away from someone else. They would fire bullets directly at Zoo, and I needed to either stop the bullet or make them curve away. It was trickier because the distance became a very real factor. The farther away Zoo was, the less I could impact the bullets. When we stood right beside each other, it was quite easy to stop the bullets directly. But as soon as he moved just 10 feet away, I couldn't get enough of my will in front of the bullet to stop it, so I had to either push it or pull it to change its course.
The most important factor about pushing and pulling bullets, I remembered Zoo's lesson, is to be careful when pulling them toward yourself. It is always easier to pull something to you rather than push it away. The reason being that when a bullet moves progressively closer to the source of your will, it can be increasingly impacted with the power. Think of angular momentum and a force exerted over an angular distance. As something moves closer to you, it will be easier to handle.
The lesson from Mac a few days ago with the long rod and the weight made more sense now. Zoo continued.
The issue will be that once a bullet is pulled in your direction, it will still have momentum since you have not done anything to slow it down, just change its trajectory. That is a good way to get yourself shot. There you have conundrum. It is easier and more effective to pull a bullet to you, but safer to push it away. We will now practice both.